All right, so I got called stupid a couple times for some of the takes that I've had in my videos. So I thought I'd go over some viewer hot takes in the world of F1. Feel free to leave your opinion on anything that I say or the takes that I'm reviewing in the comments below. And just remember, all of these are subjective, they're hot takes for a reason, and everyone's opinion is going to be different from one another. I also want to give a little preface. This is my first video I'm doing where I'm not pre-preparing a script or bullet points or anything, so give me a little leeway if I happen to throw in a rap god at some point. The first take comes from Ivy5614. Colapinto is severely underrated and overhated by everyone who isn't an Argentinian or a fan of him. I think the big takeaway from Franco Colapinto is simply that people don't realize the context of what's going on with him. He went straight from F3 into having 2 races in F2 at the end of 2023, and then he started the 2024 F2 season as a full-time driver for MP. He got pulled halfway through the season into being in the Williams F1 car, which he really didn't have any preparation whatsoever. I think the main reason Williams was replacing Logan Sargent was because they didn't want all the crash fees and all that stuff, because they were under a big financial burden and he was crashing and breaking the chassis quite a lot. But I don't understand the rationale of bringing in Franco Colapinto at that point, who didn't really have much testing beforehand, and he didn't have much experience in the junior categories. Most people that really did give the benefit of the doubt to Logan Sargent saw that the real issue was that he only had a year in F2 and he could have massively benefited from another. And replacing him with someone that only had half a season in F2 seems like the wrong decision to make, especially when you're not really prospecting for a new driver, considering that Williams had already signed Carlos Sainz for the next season. So he didn't really have that low pressure rookie environment. He was just thrown in straight into the blender where he had the pressure of not crashing to keep the car in one piece. And then he was tossed into a similar situation at Alpine, with him obviously being on a timer with how many races he's going to have. And he knows that Flavio Briatore isn't really going to be very generous when it comes to dropping him because of what he did to Jack Doohan. I think people don't realize that Franco Colapinto hasn't really had that rookie stage. He's always had something that he's had to worry about, and it's probably hampered his ability to adapt and grow in the sport. So I think saying that he's underrated and overhated is probably correct, but I think the reason that people dislike upon him so much is just because they don't factor in the context. I find that one thing people do in F1, especially nowadays, is that they love to hate on very minute things that don't include the entire context. So it's really easy to pick apart very specific things when you don't have the big picture. But in this scenario, I think Franco Colapinto definitely deserves to be treated a little bit better by the media and fans in general, but it's not really something that can be changed too often. All right, I'm going to combine 2 takes into one from EMAD, NL4JK, and Alex Racechat. Alex Racechat's also a friend of mine who I met through making these videos, so I'm going to leave a link in the description to his channel. Check out his videos. Both of these are about Charles Leclerc, with one of them being Charles Leclerc is the best driver post-1990 to never win a championship, and Leclerc will break Sterling Moss's record of most race wins without a championship. I think specifically with the one about best driver post-1990 to never win a championship, the bigger thing to go off of there is that his career is not finished, but all the drivers that you'd compare him to post-1990 have their full-fledged career to kind of compare to. The drivers that come to mind for me are Rubens Barrichello, David Coulthard, Felipe Massa, Mark Webber, stuff like that, where you have their full career on display to compare to, while Charles Leclerc is still very early in his career at this point. So it's tough to say that because it's really just a prediction at that point. But if he does stay on the trajectory he's on right now, he is on course to be better than those guys. But we're never really going to know at this point in time. So it is more of a prediction than a hot take. But I do think he will be one of those drivers that are regarded in that territory if he doesn't end up winning a championship. And going to breaking Sterling Moss's record, I'm going to assume that's in the range of winning the races and then not winning a championship later, and not just winning the races and then becoming a champion after he's broken the record. So that still goes off of the fact that he's never going to be a champion. I think he definitely is on the course to break that record in terms of wins, because I don't really see him leaving Ferrari. And with the Ferrari car, he's always in a realm where he's able to contest for a win, or at least that's what we've seen for most of his career at Ferrari so far. So getting more wins isn't really something that's unattainable, because I'm pretty sure Sterling Moss has the record of 16 and Charles Leclerc has 9, if I'm not mistaken. No, he has 8. So I still think it's possible, and I think he will, but it's just a matter if he does end up winning a championship, and that's probably going to come down to whether Ferrari can give him the car too. I see it very similarly to what people were saying about Lando Norris a couple of years ago, where they were saying that he has to either jump ship to Mercedes or Red Bull if he ever really wants a chance of contesting for a championship. And then he signed that long-term deal with McLaren where people were kind of saying like, "Oh, he's kind of taking himself out of that championship discussion." But now he's obviously in that situation where he is contesting for one, and McLaren's made those big steps. And realistically, I think it's the same way with Leclerc. People are going to say he needs to leave Ferrari, but I think his best bet is to stick with Ferrari because that's where he's going to be most probable to actually win a championship with if they have a good car, if that makes sense. I don't think that they'll have the car in the same amount of time where Charles Leclerc will still be alongside Lewis Hamilton because that'll be a lot farther down the line. But so he's probably going to be alongside Ollie Bearman, if I had to guess. And if that's the case, he will be the number one driver, and I think he will be the one to win the championship if that's the case. But I think the bigger thing to look at is just that I think if he doesn't end up winning a championship, he will 100% break that win record of 16. Another resounding one that I see from a couple of people is about Lance Stroll being overhated. I do genuinely agree with this, that Lance Stroll is very overhated. And that's also coming from a person who made a whole video of critiquing Lance Stroll. I think the bigger thing to go off of is that Stroll has a lot of low hanging fruit in terms of things to make fun of, like the monetary stuff from his parents that he was able to get through the junior categories and get his spot and keep his spot in Formula One. But realistically, he is actually not bad. People tend to forget that there's only 20 F1 drivers in the entire world, and being a midfield driver within those 20 drivers is not something that should be shamed of. It's still a very highly regarded achievement that I think should be looked at in a brighter light. And that's definitely the case that Lance Stroll's in, because you never think he's going to be championship material or anything like that. But being in the position he is, he has a pole position. He's scoring points in every season where he's on the grid. And yeah, he is being helped by his dad owning the team and keeping him there, but it's not just like he's a terrible driver. He is doing a lot better this season. I will say he had that little bit of a slump in the past couple of years, but like we saw in the Racing Point days and some of the Williams days, he really does have potential. And even now, he's doing very well. He's scoring points and he is getting kind of thrashed in the qualifying head to head, but he is actually not doing bad this season when it comes to scoring points. But I think a big thing with overhate right now in the F1 community is just people say some egregious things online. I think if you compare it from now to maybe 5 years ago, some of the things that people say in like social media comment sections and stuff like that, you just never would have seen. And a lot of that is aimed towards drivers like Lance Stroll or Lando Norris. And in general, it's kind of just weird. Most of the times where people really are hating on him are just because people love to pick on like very small things. Like I said earlier, with the low hanging fruit, it's just like, yeah, he got paid to get his way into F1 and keep his spot in F1, but there is a level of talent you do have to even make it that far. He did very well in Formula 3, and he scored podiums with both Racing Point and Williams, and he has that pole position, and many people regard him as a good wet weather driver. But at the end of the day, there is always going to be people that dislike him just because that's what the media likes to go off of, and it's constantly pushing that. But I don't think he's a bad driver, and I think that he is definitely overhated. All right, so there's plenty of stuff here when it comes to the comparison between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, and all of it is in favor of Oscar Piastri over Lando Norris. I think with Lando Norris being a lot more flamboyant when it comes to the media, people are going to take more of a liking towards Oscar Piastri just because he's kind of that silent killer personality that we don't really see in F1 nowadays. When it comes to talent, I think people give a lot more credit to, not saying that Oscar Piastri isn't good, but I think people don't give enough credit to how small the gap between the two drivers really is. Like, I see a lot of people saying that Piastri is just like light years ahead of Lando Norris and that he's really just like in his own element and he's doing this well in his third season in F1, whereas Lando Norris has a lot more. But that's just not the case. I think when you're looking at that statistic of how long they've been in F1, Piastri's only been in a bad car for half a season. That first half season with McLaren was the only time he really had a point where he was trying to, be in the battle in the midfield, trying to fight for points. And the rest of it, he was in a top tier car that was almost guaranteed points and now in race winning caliber. So it's tough to say that the time that Lando Norris had over him was anything special because in that time, he was in a different state of F1, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that the cars he had before weren't race winning cars. Obviously, in 2021, I think he could have had the win in Russia and the win in Belgium based on his qualifying pace. But the bigger thing to look at is that he was never in a car as dominant as the McLaren now or the one last year. It was always a matter of getting a podium was an incredible performance and something that should be celebrated in the way that a race win isn't even celebrated as right now. So, looking at it in the way that all that extra time helped him so much, I don't think it did as much as people claim it to be. You also got to remember Piastri won literally everything in the junior categories, so he was never in a situation where he wasn't fighting to win everything. And I think the fact that he didn't have to change his mindset much plays a big factor, that he didn't really have to adapt to much changing scenarios. Obviously, he did have to adapt to the fact that he's moving up to F1 and the cars are much different, but what his aim is, race to race, didn't change that much in the fact that he's going to win a lot of things. Also, when it comes to bias between McLaren, I think there is specific evidence to point at that you could say that they're favoring Lando, or even evidence that they're favoring Oscar in some scenarios, but I really don't think it's like anything huge. As a fan, you can kind of circulate rumors around this sort of stuff, but you never really know. And that's the whole thing about it, is that when it comes to bias as a team, we're never going to know. So just accusing teams of favoring one driver or another isn't really going to get you anywhere because we're never going to really know the truth. But at the end of the day, I think that Lando Norris gets a lot of stick for not being at the same level that Oscar Piastri is, but I think the gap between Lando Norris and Piastri is a lot smaller than people think. Regardless of which driver you think is better out of the two, it's not like one is miles ahead of the other. All right, we got another one from Cordy WN3FL. Profile I've noticed has been a subscriber from early on, so thank you for that. Ollie Bearman will never finish on the podium in his career. Piastri is a better driver than Norris, and Norris will never win a title. I did just go over the Piastri and Norris stuff, so I'm not going to dive into that again. But I will go into the Ollie Bearman take. It definitely is more of a prediction than a take, but I will give you my opinion on it regardless. I think based on his trajectory that he has already raced in a Ferrari, and Ferrari really does like Ollie Bearman, he probably will end up in a Ferrari seat, and I don't see a world in which he's in a Ferrari seat and doesn't end up scoring a podium. Obviously, we could be looking at a much different scenario if he, for some reason, doesn't end up going to Ferrari, or if Ferrari's like terrible or something in the next regulations. But realistically, the chance of him not finishing on the podium when he has such a clear path to being in a top team is really unlikely. Obviously, it's still early to say that he's going to make that move to Ferrari because he's a rookie at a Haas team that isn't guaranteed to make him get the step up. And he could suffer a similar fate to someone like Mick Schumacher, where he doesn't get that step up and he just gets ditched by the Ferrari Driver Academy. But I really don't see it happening. I can't imagine Lewis Hamilton's going to be at Ferrari for too much longer. And I think by the time he's done with Ferrari, it'll be the perfect time for them to elevate someone. And the only real choice at this point in time, if they're going to go with their own pipeline, is Ollie Bearman. The only other junior that I would see could be at that point is Dino Beganovic or Rafael Camara, but they're not in F1 yet, and they're both not at a point where I think they're going to be in it soon. So I don't necessarily think that any other driver is going to get promoted other than Ollie Bearman. And like I said earlier, if he's at Ferrari, I think it's inevitable that he'll score a podium eventually. So I'm going to have to disagree with this take. All right, so I'm going to call it there. I think that's enough takes for today. But if you guys want this to become a series and I go over some more of these takes, feel free to leave some more in the comments below and show some support to the video. And that's it.